Hello again, everybody. Welcome to the program, and thank you for joining us for today's episode of Trent Talks, Zooming In on Appearances. I'm Stephen Stone, Trent University Chancellor and proud alumnus, and I'm so pleased you're with us today, joining Trent faculty members Dr. Momin Rahman, Professor of Sociology, and Dr. Moira Howes, Professor of Philosophy. Together, we'll be discussing our emotions and perceptions of self-image in our virtual, social, and work environments. But before we begin our discussions today, we would like to first respectfully acknowledge that Trent University is located on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the First Peoples for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor those teachings. Momin and Moira, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Before we get into our viewer-submitted questions, I'd like to ask you both a bit about your research focuses. And Momin, maybe beginning with you?
Sure. So I'm in sociology and also Canadian studies. The majority of my research is actually on LGBT issues and citizenship and at the moment conflicts with Muslim cultures around that. But I have an evil academic twin persona, which is appropriate for this kind of topic, which does a lot of stuff on celebrity culture. And so that's where my interest in social media, celebrity and appearances has come from. And the research that I've done on that is what's helped me, think about this topic today.
Well, thank you for that. And Moira, could you tell us about your research focus?
I research how reason, feelings, and emotions work together in the difficult pursuit of objective, unbiased knowledge about the world, as well as self-knowledge. And I'm especially interested in the question of how feelings and emotions influence the judgments we make about the world, about ourselves, as well as about each other.
Perfect. Let's move into our viewer-submitted questions. And Momin, turning to you first.
Yeah.
And Momin, could I ask, because we're going to be talking about image on Zooming and things like that, could I ask you to stand up because you've got such a natty bow tie? I just want to see exactly what. There you go. You've got you've got your shorts on. That's right. So this is a perfect intro to what we're going to be talking about. Since March, a lot of us have become relative experts with video conferencing and adapting our work to be delivered in virtual formats. An upside, or perhaps really a downside, of video conferencing is that we now spend much of our day seeing and projecting ourselves. So the question is, what impact does this have on our self-image?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because we've all been going through this switch to having to engage in work and studying from home. And in sociology, many years ago, there was the development of explanations of the self and how we present the self. And that's associated with the work of Erving Goffman. And I thought it was really interesting because those ideas talk about the presentation of the self, how we have to engage in presenting ourselves in work environments, in social environments. But the other side of that Goffman talked about was that there's always a private space. And he talked about that as a kind of backstage where we don't have to, think about how people are perceiving us. We don't necessarily have to think about, how we look or how we dress. And I think the new era has really kind of blurred those boundaries, right? And there's been an intrusion into what we think of as our private space. That's become our workspace. I feel this is my study, but often I'm just here, writing and reading. I'm not often conducting meetings. And now this has actually become a workspace environment. Amongst that as well, I think that, we might think that we're already used to visual culture because of social media. And I think that that's true. Like we have become used to, being able to create videos, or putting up profile pictures. But again, we've always had some control over when and where we do that. And what's happening right now, I think, particularly through, workplace meetings, is that we don't necessarily have that much control over when we're having to present ourselves through that kind of media culture. And I know that your experiences, professionally, you've seen the negative impacts of that media culture. And there's a lot of research in sociology and in psychology and education about the anxieties of social media culture. And I think, although it's been great that technologically we can continue to work, I think that's been very important. We are also in a situation where there's the anxieties around social media are kind of impacting us. We don't have any private space, or we have less and less private space in order to, kind of manage that. And I think that's been the kind of, the kind of facility of being able to use the technology, but that comes along with the anxieties and the problems that we already know, and this kind of intense focus on our presentation of self.
Excellent. Well presented, and it sets the context for our next question for you, Moira. We all have an emotional connection to how we present ourselves and our public image. What could the emotional ramifications be from the past 6 months or so, when we've all been physically distanced, but technologically connected?
Yeah, it's a great question. On the one hand, technologies like Zoom have led to a lot of unexpected joys in connecting with others virtually when we could not connect otherwise. Many people are connecting with others that they haven't seen in ages, or whom they would not have connected with otherwise. So while it's really difficult to be physically distanced from others, these kind of technologies have been really helpful for many people, emotionally helpful. On the other hand, connecting through online technologies can raise anxieties, certainly as Momin was talking about. Many have experienced or at least read about cases where people have been shamed, disrespected, or otherwise harmed online. And frequently, people's physical appearance or professionalism are the focus of these online slights, insults, and even attacks. So embarrassment, anger, feelings of unworthiness, envy, comparing ourselves with others, these are some of the most uncomfortable feelings we experience. So we're not wrong to feel anxious about increased attention online.
Well, and I'd like to come back to that in a moment, because to me, I'm fascinated by this. And Momin, you mentioned it that also that I've had some experiences in my role as a television producer on this. But first, and Momin, turning to you, pulling back slightly from the individual, our constant Zooming has really offered a bigger look into our private lives. From children, pets, and partners joining the call, to our backgrounds showing off our living spaces. But now we also see many people, including many students, turning off their cameras when possible for meetings and classes. So Momin, the question is to you, what can we expect from this blurring of lines between public and private lives? And in particular, what is the impact on students at all levels?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a question particularly around students that I know a lot of the colleagues around Trent are thinking about as we prepare courses. And I think this goes to the kind of issues of judgment, in fact, that Moira was talking about, that it's this fear of judgment that we know already is there in social media culture. And I think it's difficult for people to kind of think about the space of a classroom, if it's done remotely, as different from other forms of social media, right? So there's a blurring conceptually in our minds and a blurring in reality, and people don't want to be judged. And a lot of the problems may be perceiving that we may be judged. We actually might, that might not happen, but we might worry, okay, well, the background here, the house doesn't look as nice as other students' houses. It doesn't look professional, and students may not be able to control that. That might be a decision that their caregivers or their parents have made about, decor, and even decorating a room. Maybe a student has, stuff from when they were a high school student rather than a university student. So I guess there's all these kind of worries about how do we, manage, the image that we present. And I think those are genuine worries. And so I think it's totally fine, for example, if we're saying to students, you can switch off your camera, because the real issue for us is inclusion, right? In education or in the classroom. Like, we want to be able to have people participate. And so we have to navigate this particular period in terms of the technology to make sure that, as much as we can remotely, we're still providing the ways for people to be included in the classroom. And that really comes down to things like saying, well, okay, don't have to have your camera on. There's also, advice we're giving out on syllabuses now about, recording, also about, respectful behavior, that this is actually a teaching environment, it's not like a social media conversation. Those things are much easier to manage when we're physically in a classroom, because, that we would say in sociology that's a particular script. We know what the environment is, we know who's guiding that. And when we're together, this is true in any situation, when we're together with other people doing the same thing, we conform to the standards of behavior or the script for that particular situation. And everybody understands what that is in a classroom. And it's trying to reproduce that online is going to be, a completely different kind of, like a set of rules that we're going to have to get used to. The other thing that I want to say about that briefly is that, there are concerns, of course, about, how we manage this, and the blurring is difficult. But more generally, during this time, something else has also been going on a larger social scale. And that's really the fact that the pandemic and the public health concerns have kind of really forced a pause upon us, right? Literally a pause in terms of teaching on campus, a pause for jobs for lots of people. Maybe that's given us some time to pause and reflect. And I think there have been some other movements going on, and I'm thinking here in particular around the protests against institutional and systemic racism. There's a power to that I think wouldn't have happened if it wasn't during the pandemic, when people were kind of pausing and already, reflecting perhaps. And one of the advantages of this period is that it's asking us to think about other people whose lives are not necessarily directly connected to us. So wearing a mask in public is thinking about other people that you don't really know. There's a kind of, maybe a movement or a kind of recognition of, empathy, or that we're in this together. And I think that the kind of the mass kind of embrace of wanting to think about systemic racism, particularly by white majorities, is another example of that, right? People are ready and open to say, okay, let's think about this thing that maybe we don't experience, and let's develop some empathy and let's develop some compassion.
That's fascinating stuff. It makes me wish that I'd studied sociology when I was
well, that's good.
At Trent. I did actually study philosophy, which brings us back to you, Moira.
That's also good.
If I could inject a personal context to this next question. As some of you may know, as the producer of the Degrassi television series, I became very much involved with the social media interactions with our fans. And I observed a malaise amongst our largely teenage audience, resulting from the stress of creating a perfect online face to the world. The stress of knowing that your own curated and doctored self-image was online, competing against all your friends. But even though you knew logically that all of them also curated and doctored and filtered their presence, there was a fear that maybe they hadn't actually doctored so much, that they were being more authentic, and that their lives were therefore that much better than yours. So I observed a real mental health issue arising from the creation of online personae. And so let me pose the question this way. We've talked about judgment already today. Judgment is a theme underscoring our choices in appearance and real and virtual backgrounds. And judging or being judged elicits a strong emotional response. Why is this? And what can we do to extend more grace to others, and perhaps even more importantly, extend more grace to ourselves?
Well, it's certainly understandable that people would want to curate their image on social media because it's really painful to be judged negatively over social media and elsewhere. People find it really painful to be judged negatively and to be socially excluded. Both in our evolutionary past and in the present, being negatively judged and socially excluded can have dire consequences. We have emotions like shame and anger and embarrassment, or what philosophers refer to as the social and moral emotions, because they help protect us from exclusion. And they also help motivate us to create good relationships with others. But despite the usefulness and the importance of social and moral emotions, they are somewhat crude tools. They don't track the truth all that accurately. Ancient philosophers from the east to west and from the south to north recognized that pain associated with judgments about our appearance and our performance is really difficult to deal with. It makes us really unhappy. And they also recognize just how tenuously these judgments are connected to the truth. And this was helpful to them in developing remedies. And the Stoics are a great example here because they developed many remedies for dealing with negative judgments from others. They introduced a number of cognitive methods to help take the sting out of negative judgments, slights, and insults. And many of these methods you can still find today in contemporary cognitive behavioral therapies. One of their key remedies is to notice that when someone slights you, they typically reveal more about their own minds, their own level of virtue and skill with people, their own emotions, than they actually reveal about you. In slighting you, they've just told you something about themselves. And once you realize this, the Stoics then recommend that you either make light out of the slight, right? You might say, you think that's an insult? Well, here's a really good insult about me. Or you just ignore the insult. It's wise to be generous with this person who has just unwittingly revealed that they're having a really bad day or a really skillful moment, and leave it there. This said, it's wise to avoid pondering what might be going on with the insulter, and we're often tempted to do this. You don't want to fall into the trap of putting them down because then you're the unskillful one, according to the Stoics anyway. And this is where the Stoic approach differs from the modern day consider the source approach to dealing with insults, which often seems to involve an unflattering counter-judgment. So we want to avoid that trap. The other thing is that it's really helpful to notice that when we judge others, we get this feeling of certainty. We get this feeling of truthfulness along with it. We feel the truth of this judgment in the moment. But that is a feeling. And experiencing a feeling of truthfulness is not the same thing as knowing the truth. Paying close attention to that distinction is really helpful. You may feel that someone has just said something true about your hair or your clothes, when in reality, their judgment just won't stand up to scrutiny. And the judgments we make about others are subject to the same kind of skeptical problem. So it's important to distinguish feeling from truth there. The feeling that our judgments are true can easily lead us astray.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to go from the last question was very deep. We were talking about Stoicism and great philosophers of all time. And our final viewer submitted question, Momin, it's for you, and it's a fun one. From all of this, do you expect we'll see big changes in hair and beauty trends? Are we welcoming in an era of natural hair colors and less cropped styles, a further evolution in workplace dress codes, or is this all just a flash in the pan? What will we see when we can see each other in person again?
Well, I'm gonna do a typical academic thing and pass the hair question on to Moira after I finish, because um, I'm somewhat envious of Moira's hair. I have, mine is basically disappearing, and the lack of access to a barber during the pandemic didn't really increase the volume or thickness of my hair. So, this was something I didn't benefit from. But yeah, I think that is a really important question, because we've had a period where we haven't been able to go out, and even if we have like nice new clothes or clothes we haven't worn, we haven't been able to kind of use them. Lots of people haven't had access to a barber and this or a hairdresser, and this is a particularly gendered issue as well, right? Like, women get judged much more for that level of grooming than men do. But I think one of the kind of slightly strange things about this period as we're reopening and we're trying to sort of get back to normal is that getting back to normal is a good thing, right? Like, we want to feel that we have some kind of normality back in our lives. But in our cultures, in rich Western cultures, but also globally now, a lot of that normality is about consumer culture, right? And it's about consuming, not just products and services, but also consuming services and products to do with our embodied self, right? So, using a hairdresser, coloring your hair, makeup, clothes, also consuming fitness regimes, like using the gym, which people haven't been able to do. And there's a really interesting, body of work out sociology, that focused on the embodied self, and how in a kind of less traditional culture where there's more access to consumer goods and also less kind of socially clear divisions between classes, for example, so you can't really tell what kind of level of income people have from how they dress anymore, right? Like, the consumer market is, in Bauman's terms, a kind of liquid modernity of consumerism. It's very free flowing. So that attempt to get back to normal is going to come with those resources that we have for creating ourselves, which are done through consumerism. So that is going to remain, I think. That's going to be something that we reach for, because that's what we're used to, and that's going to make us feel good. But as Moira pointed out, it comes with all these pre-existing kind of anxieties and emotions about how we get judged. And I'm wondering whether, we will start to see a period where, if we can have this collective memory of like, okay, well, we had those meetings, where people, couldn't get their hair done, and, they had kids running around and animals running around, and that was their life, right? And that was their life, and they were still able to work and still able to be a friend. That maybe we can have some attempt to remember that period where we were much more willing and able to exercise compassion and empathy towards, the people that we interact with. It would be great, I think, if we could really emerge from this with a kind of celebration of, like, different styles and different, more natural styles, or less emphasis on consumerism. But I'm a gay man, and our culture is often focused on appearances. And part of me has also been thinking, oh my God, I have all these like nice clothes that are just in my wardrobe, and I haven't been able to wear this summer because I'm not at conferences or I'm not like at work. And part of me kind of wants to do that. Like, I kind of like, oh, I want to go out and dress up. It's also playing that game. It's a double-edged sword, right? Like, if you're doing that, you're already buying into the culture of visual judgment on how we present ourselves. So I don't know if there's a way that we can weave our way through that remembers this period where, quite rightly, and I think in quite positive ways, we haven't exercised judgment on that.
And Moira, Momin wanted to put the hair and beauty trends question over to you. You had some final thought.
Yeah, and I think Momin makes a great point about the importance of keeping that collective memory going when we get back to in-person workplaces. I personally hope that we're creating a movement towards more comfortable, more simplified appearance and attire. I'm really happy about the new dressy sweatpants trend. I hope that stays around. And I think simple is good. There are a lot of philosophers who have a wardrobe of all the same shirt and all the same pants so that they don't have to make an additional decision throughout the day, because we only have a certain number of decisions we can make each day before decision fatigue sets in, and philosophers want to keep their brain power for thinking their supposedly deep thoughts, right? So I think simplicity and comfort, feeling good is really, really important. And of course, taking care of the environment, buying less, needing less in the way of clothes and cosmetics and so on is really great things. So simple and comfortable, I hope, is the future.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And as our viewers know, the final question that I always like to ask is, are there some positive takeaways and lessons related to our discussions today? Moira?
Yeah, well, I would say that if you find it challenging to deal well with negative judgments, take heart. You're in excellent company. The Stoics, the ancient Buddhist philosophers, the ancient Aristotle, they all found negative judgments really painful and difficult. And the philosophical view is that it takes practice to respond wisely to negative judgments. So no one is expected to be able to deal with them well without putting in some effort and some practice. The good news is that with practice, it is possible to reduce the suffering associated with such judgments. You can gain freedom from the evaluation of others and feel more joy in your life as a result. I'm finding that this particular practice is lifelong, but it is helpful and it does make things better.
And Momin, is there a hopeful message you can leave us with today?
Yeah, I think that, as Moira was saying, these anxieties that we have around appearances are real. And I think it's important for people to take away from this that the anxieties that we have around the kind of invasion of our home or private spaces is also genuine. And that's a real, shift that we've had to cope with. And so just sometimes recognizing, why you feel uncomfortable is really important, and recognizing that that's actually a real issue. And that blurring of the kind of backstage and the front stage is something that we're going to have to navigate. So knowing what the problem is and then learning ways to navigate it. And as Moira said, perhaps learning to navigate that by resisting the notion that, we should be judged, but also by us not judging others is something new that we can learn or something that we can expand upon, because I think we actually do that a lot of the time, but we don't necessarily do it as much, as often as we can. And it's okay to feel that, we're, perhaps part of our focus on appearances is for ourselves, for how we want to feel that we act in the world or be in the world. It's also absolutely, patterned through how other people perceive you. So, if you're a young racialized man, you have to be careful about how you dress in particular areas. If you're a professional woman, you have to dress in a particular way for people to take you seriously. So those things are going to stay, but perhaps we can see some chipping away of the foundations of those elements that are based on a kind of general judgment.
Well, thank you both. That's a nice summation. Thank you, Moira, the philosopher, and Momin, the sociologist, for spending your time with us and giving us your insights today. And thanks also to everyone at home for joining us. Please tune in again 2 weeks from now on Wednesday, September 2nd, when we will welcome Dr. Sarah West, Assistant Professor in Biology and Nursing, and Dr. Kelly McGuire, Chair of Women and Gender Studies, for a discussion about face masks, both the science behind them and the social responses. This could be controversial. I'm looking forward to it.
And Stephen, may I interrupt with a thanks of my own?
Absolutely.
As the communications team and Alison, who's working with us, said, I was involved a little bit at the beginning planning this, but I really want to say thank you to the communications team, because this has turned into a much longer and bigger series than we'd initially thought. We didn't know how long the situation was going to last. So I think they've been doing a great job. And I think that you as Chancellor have been doing a fantastic job of engaging with this every week for, I can't even remember how many weeks it is now. So I think this is above and beyond the normal duties of a Chancellor. So I think everybody at Trent would extend some, very warm thanks to you for being so engaged over such a long period of time.
Well, thank you so much. And now you're making me blush. And it really is a wonderful team. So let's keep the conversation going by submitting questions for our next installment and continuing the general discussion on social using the hashtag Trent Talks. So until 2 weeks from now, be safe. And please always remember, you are not alone. Goodbye for now.